The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, and the best digital health product.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation. The Galien Week of Innovation has been made possible thanks to our precious friends and partners who share the Galien Foundation's values. First off, the two exclusive platinum partners are We would now like to acknowledge our two gold partners. Furthermore, we proudly introduce our corporate leaders partners. The associate partners are the grantors are To conclude, we are extremely fortunate to work with outstanding media partners who have contributed to the Galien Foundation's renown.
Wonderful. Welcome everyone to the Galien Foundation Week of Innovation webinars here in New York. I'm Elisa Wilson. I'm a Managing Director in Life Sciences at Accenture, and I'll be your moderator today. The objective this week is to provide additional content and background from our largest annual event, the Prix Galien USA Awards, to be held this Thursday in New York, in conjunction with our annual Galien Forum of speakers representing top scientific experts and leaders in global health. We've developed this webinar series to give our nominees for Best Pharmaceutical, Best Biotech, Best MedTech, and Best Digital Solution product greater visibility in describing their journey of medical discovery. This year's Galien USA Awards has a record of 84 nominees for our 4 categories and from 65 companies covering 15 diverse therapeutic areas, ranging from cancer, cardiology, and neurosciences to infectious and very rare genetic diseases. We'll be looking closely at the products in all of these critical areas throughout the week. Because of the number of nominees and the range conditions represented by all of the excellent silent science, the Galien USA Awards Committee has decided to host this series of 14 webinars prior to Thursday's forum and awards ceremony, where the winners of each of the best 4 categories will be announced. In the Best Biotech category, which is our focus today, We'll be holding 3 webinars due to the large number of products representing in this important field. This webinar, we have an hour allotted, and it's devoted to 4 of our 6 nominees in cancer and other rare diseases. We've prepared some questions that we'll share with the panel, and we'll get into just in a moment where we'll get to meet our esteemed panel with us today. Before we start doing that, we'd like to really focus this session on an important central question that you just saw in the video. Can the foundational biological understandings now being brought to cancer care be leveraged to secure a targeted, more personalized approach to other rare conditions, particularly blood-based hematologic disorders? Before we start into our panel, we'd like to actually take just a minute to do a poll question. And if we could have that perfect, thank you so much. For the audience, what we'd like you to do is just take one quick minute and answer the question. We'd like to hear your insights. What is the most promising new medical advancement likely within the next 5 to 10 years? So if everyone could just take a minute, share your thoughts. We'll come back to this at the end of today. So we'll give everyone just a few seconds to respond. Okay, hopefully everyone's getting their votes in. Okay, well, everyone's taking the next minute to do that, and we'll come back to that at the end. I'd like to just take a minute to share a little bit about our panel, as well as the flow for today. So we're going to be starting with a panel and some questions. You will have the opportunity as the audience, we will have time at the end for audience questions. So if you do have a question, there should be information on the screen where you can actually share your question that will go to me as your moderator, and we'll ask those at the end of the session. But without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing our 4 nominees representing and joining me with the panel today. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Javad Shahidi, who's the Vice President of Global Oncology R&D at Daiichi Sankyo. Next, Dr. Liz Thompson, who's the EVP of Research and Development at Horizon. Dr. Rui de Passos Sosa, who's the Global Medical Head of TTP program at Sanofi. And with us, our fourth, but last but not least, Dr. Joanna Opolinska, Vice President of Oncology and Clinical Development for Tumor Cell Targeting at GSK. So thank you so much, the panel, for joining us today. We're excited to hear your insights. I'll ask that each of the panel, as we start with our first question, also do a short introduction as well. So let's get into it. Our first question today for the panel is, why did your company choose to focus on the disease state and indication associated with your product? And in what ways did the product represent a breakthrough therapy and meet an unmet medical need? So with that, let me hand it over, and we're going to start with Dr. Javad.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Alisa, very much for the introduction. Very happy to be with you and with the panel. The drug that we are talking about, Enhertu, is a drug that is serving oncology patients in the past 2 years, and it's continuing its development. I think I don't need to re-emphasize the unmet need in oncology, in cancer. All of us panelists and perhaps all the audience are familiar with that. I would just say that specifically for Enhertu, which is a HER2-directed antibody drug conjugate, Daiichi Sankyo found an opportunity with our in-house ADC technology to actually address a clear unmet need across multiple indications. That is a realization of many years ago, and I have to say it's now in the hindsight, we see the fruit of those decisions many years ago today that we can talk about. I would say the improvements we can talk about is specifically on the data. I would say that HER2 has shown across multiple different tumor types improvement of patient outcomes over the current existing standard of care, which is also recent. And in the past 2 decades, HER2 therapies have been developing significantly, but we can talk perhaps later in the panel discussion on the specifics of what those improvements are.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, could we have Liz?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. It is, really a pleasure to be here among this exemplary group of industry leaders talking on this interesting topic. And the product I'll mostly be talking about is Tepezza, or teprotumumab, which is our product here at Horizon Therapeutics for thyroid eye disease. That's an interesting disease state that's maybe a little bit of a left turn from most of what you'll be hearing about on this panel, and I'll talk about it a bit more in a moment. But it's also part of what brought me to Horizon Therapeutics, where I now lead the R&D organization, which is a group of more than 200 scientists and technical experts who are really focused on bringing about solutions for patients living with rare autoimmune and severe inflammatory diseases. So the story of Tepezza and teprotumumab for us starts some years back and basically brought together two things. For Horizon, our focus really is on rare diseases, which has been something that is deeply personal throughout the organization. Our CEO has a rare disease and an autoimmune disease, and that has been his passion in driving this organization. And as we learned more about thyroid eye disease, it became clear that this disease, which manifests with things like proptosis or eye bulging, diplopia, and double vision, which keeps patients from being able to do things like read, drive a car, hold down jobs. The more we learned about the disease, the more it became clear that this was the kind of thing that we were interested in developing solutions for, something that is a rare disease, has a substantial both physical, psychosocial, profound impact on patients with few, if any, treatment options. Here, there was essentially nothing for treatment, and the only thing that could be done for patients were fairly invasive surgeries. Brought together with that was an evolving scientific understanding of the role of IGF-1R, which used to be an oncology target, and its potential utility in thyroid eye disease. And so for us, we pulled together a combination of a disease that was clearly impactful with patients who had few, if any, treatment options, and an emerging area of science indicating that we had a novel way of potentially impacting this disease state. So that's what took us down the path of Tepezza and thyroid eye disease, and looking forward to talking about it more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. Next, if we could go to Ro.
Hi, everyone. Truly a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting Sanofi. I believe I'm the assigned person from the Sanofi team because I started working in the caplacizumab project 5 years ago, where I was leading in Avalinx, the company originally developing caplacizumab. I was leading the medical teams. So caplacizumab is actually was selected to be developed for acquired TTP because first of all, the high unmet medical need was very, very clear. So prior to caplacizumab being available, which is the first drug actually being approved for this rare indication, patients were suffering in these acute red blood clotting disorder, a mortality up to 20%. Furthermore, even importantly as well, patients that could respond initially to therapy, up to half of them was actually having a recurrence of disease when the treatments, namely plasma exchange and immunosuppression, were actually discontinued. Importantly, also up to 1 in 6 patients were actually not responding to therapies at all. So this was the first reason why we went there, the high unmet medical need. The second reason, not less important, was we could clearly identify with caplacizumab mechanism of action that we could target a completely different pathway in the physiopathology of disease that was actually not being addressed by either plasma exchange or immunosuppression. So caplacizumab blocks DA1 domain of VWF, which is kind of the hallmark of this disease. In TTP, in acquired TTP, the ADAMTS13 activity is actually blocked by the existence of autoantibodies, which makes this ultra large VWF in circulation, adhering to platelets and causing this disseminated microthrombi formation. So we really anticipated by using caplacizumab in these patients, we could actually stop one of the hallmarks of the disease, which we could actually show in the phase 2 and phase 3 trials. But I know that we have some time at the end or later on in this panel to discuss the clinical benefits. So I would pause here, and leave now to the next panelist.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Joanna? Oh, Joanna, you may be on mute. Okay, wonderful. We'll get back to Joanna on the next round of questions and have her do her intro as well when able to. Okay, fantastic. And just as the panel was saying, first of all, amazing set of therapies that have really relevance to patient outcomes and unmet needs. If you would, panel, I would love to hear a bit more around the measurable impact that you can share on the clinical outcomes and benefits for patients, and also just the clinician's response to the product thus far.
Maybe if I can just build on what Rui said, I think that's an important point that Rui mentioned. I would just rephrase his second point. The understanding of the biology of any disease and understanding your drug and what it can provide is the key in success in clinical development. So Rui's example applies to any drug that is successful, and the same with Daiichi Sankyo and HER2. So the role of HER2 is well understood. You have an understanding of what your drug can provide, and then you just apply that, and you can actually go fast when you have that understanding of the biology. And maybe if we can I want to spend time on the field of oncology, how the frameworks allow for going pretty fast from first patient dose to the actual approval of the drug and availability and access, if you know how to do it and if you know that biology. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. I will give a little bit more on the story of HER2 and what it has brought. First patient dose in clinic for HER2 was only in 2015, September of 2015. So just 6 years ago. The drug already has 2 indications in many countries across the world, in HER2-positive breast cancer and HER2-positive gastric cancer, and has shown data we have shown data in HER2-mutant lung cancer, in colorectal cancer, across many tumor types with activity of the drug, and the development is ongoing. I want to highlight one recent example that probably just speaks to the activity of the drug and the benefit it can provide to the patients, that was shared at a recent ESMO, European Society of Medical Oncology annual meeting in September, just a month ago. And that was the result of a phase 3 study in second-line HER2-positive breast cancer versus TDM1, Tatsila, which is an approved, well-regarded, available in the market ADC, and the hazard ratio that was shown is unprecedented for any breast cancer trial so far. Hazard ratio was 0.28. I wish I could show that Kaplan-Meier curve. We don't have the slides to share, but it's an amazing separation of the curve, type of things that you see only sometimes in placebo-controlled studies. And that's the improvement of an ADC that can bring to patients' lives. I have to say, and again, the concept of ADCs are not new, but we really think at Daiichi Sankyo we have a technology that can deliver on the promise of ADCs in short and in a concise way, is just deliver the drug in the part of the body that is needed to the tumor cells. And if you can't do that, that's sounds simple, but it's very complicated. So I just shared one piece of data in the HER2 positive breast cancer, but as I said, the development of the drug is ongoing with good activity across several different tumor types.
Amazing, thank you. Liz, Marie?
Sure. So, I mean, I think, again, I do want to echo the fact that it is in our field a really important point that we have these biological insights, and they can be sort of step functions, both in our understanding of diseases as well as our ability to bring forward new medicines that can address them. And that, I think, is part of what makes all of what we do so, fun and exciting and constantly a learning process. As I think I alluded to a little bit, for us, the evolving biology around our understanding of the role that IGF-1R can play has been a transformative part of our journey as Horizon, and probably most importantly, the journey of Tepezza as a drug. As there were emerging data from researchers out in the field, not even necessarily all from within the walls of Horizon, that helped establish that as a relevant target within thyroid eye disease. And some of the additional or initial clinical data, which actually really did give us the conviction to take this forward and to take it forward as quickly as possible with, expedited review from FDA, et cetera. In terms of clinical outcomes, going back to our phase 2 and phase 3 trials, if you look across the program, we've got, something like 80% response rate. And one of the most bothersome things that I talked about for patients is that double vision, that impact on basically any of the activities of life that I think we all take for granted. And, across our programs, what we did see was about half of patients having complete resolution of that double vision. So overall, though, really to echo the fact that what's interesting in all of our fields, I think, is watching as we're able to take new understandings of biology and really transform them into new therapies we can bring to patients.
Incredible.
So I might next. So we evaluated the safety and efficacy of capacizumab in 2 trials, the phase 2 called Titan study and the phase 3 called Hercules trials. So focusing on the phase 3 pivotal trials, what we have seen, and going back to the point of translational medicine and trying to see what was the physiopathology of disease, mechanism of action, and clinical benefits. Our primary endpoint, we actually could show that patients treated with capacizumab together with plasma exchange and immunosuppression had a faster time to platelet count normalization, which means we could indirectly measure the microthrombi formation. So if the platelets are actually not being consumed anymore in the microthrombi, you could see the platelet count normalization. Could also see as a key secondary endpoint that patients treated with capacizumab in comparison with placebo had a lower incidence of a composite of TTP-related deaths, recurrence of TTP, or a thromboembolic event during the treatment period. And the reason why we use this composite endpoint is being this ultra-rare disease. The trial was basically too small to be powered enough to isolate any of these basically important clinical outcomes. Of course, we also need to evaluate safety. And again, going back to the biology, not surprisingly, when you completely block VDWF activity, we saw an increase in mucocutaneous bleeding in the trials. Most of these events were mild to moderate, but when you look also to the real, life experience, post-marketing experience, we have seen cases being reported of patients receiving capacizumab and having, life-threatening or fatal bleeding events. And this happened mainly in patients taking, other concomitant antiplatelet agents or anticoagulants. As such, we now recommend patients, to use, physicians to use this drug with caution in patients, particularly those with underlying conditions that may predispose them to a high risk of bleeding. So I think we also saw in real life a confirmation of what we have seen in the trials. I'm not going to go into the details, but there are several publications coming after the introduction of capacizumab in the market, consistently showing what we have seen before, which is really kind of, an improvement on these really important outcomes for patients, namely, combination of mortality, recurrence of disease, exacerbation, and refractoriness to therapy.
Yeah, thank you so much, panel, for sharing. I think all of us understand that this process of discovery is complex. If you would share some of the challenges that and your organization confronted, and really the movement from early proof of concept to human trials and then ultimately market authorization.
Yeah, I'm just going first. I don't know if somebody else wants to go first, but I just by habit, I think
It's
it turned out
perfect.
to be this way. So I would share a specific example from Enhertu. And again, I especially when you shrink the timelines in clinical development, those challenges will amplify. We will have even more challenges. I give you specific examples. As I said, it took about 4 years, just over 4 years, for the drug to be approved from the first patient ever dosed in clinic to the actual FDA approval. And that's a very fast timeline, certainly for biologics, but even across oncology drugs. Now, the reason that it's possible, it's partly is that some frameworks in oncology allows that, although this is just too fast. It's probably a record-setting timeline. But imagine that I think the most important challenge, going back to your question, is timely decision making. When you have such a shrink timeline, you're talking about making investment decisions, important investment decisions, designing of the studies, and defining the clinical development program with minimal data available at the time. Because if you want to go through a phase 1, see the results, then you go through the phase 2, see the results, then go through the phase 3, and then file. That's a 10-year process. The whole point of this rapid development is to make some of these decisions faster without seeing, and that is, to me, is the most challenging part, to be bold, but not crazy, to be informed by the data that you have, but feel comfortable that you have enough data to embark on a multi-billion-dollar sometimes investment from the company. And that is, I think, to me, the story of success. I'll give you one more example, and I'll stop for this section, is that manufacturing of ADCs is hundreds of millions of dollars of investment upfront. So you have to make that decision years before your approval, and you have to make that commitment years before your possible approval on much minimal data, hoping, again, I use the word carefully, hoping that this will pan out. But I would say it's not just a blind hope. It is based on the evidence that you have available at the time, but it takes a courage and a boldness and a commitment for any company to already put that hundreds of millions of dollars to build the factories, if you will, in the hope that the clinical data will pan out. Because that process of just manufacturing is years of consuming time. And if you want to do that not in parallel, but sequentially, that easily means that you are expanding your timelines another 3-4 years. I'm glad we didn't do it at Daiichi Sankyo, but these are some of the challenges that come naturally when you go too fast.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In probably every process, there is some portion where there's a leap of faith, and it is a grounded faith, ideally. I think, we, with ours, probably the biggest leap of faith with teprotumumab was taking it from where it was originally going to be developed and taking a sharp left turn and take it forward in a very different indication based, again, on evolving science. So it was a fact-based leap of faith, but there is, I think, at some point in all development processes, some degree where you have to make your best judgment on a small amount of information and take something forward and often make big bets. I'll say a couple of other sort of unusual challenges that I think that we experienced with teprotumumab, was the the blessing of imperfect timing in the sense of getting approval and launching our drug about 6 weeks before we went into the COVID pandemic. I think that that is a challenge that has been shared by many in the industry and can be a difficult thing when trying to launch a new product. I would say that I think we got sort of the double whammy from that point of view, because the other impact we had was our manufacturing was done by Galien, who, as it turns out, was also producing one of the COVID vaccines. And so we went into a government mandated essentially shutdown of our manufacturing process for a short period of time while Galien was focusing on COVID vaccines. Fortunately, through great partnership with Galien, through good, strong working relationships with FDA, we were able to come up with a different manufacturing strategy where we could manufacture more product on those runs that we were able to get. But I think that basically, anytime that you're doing something quickly under time pressure, et cetera, there's some creativity and like I said, some of those leaps of faith that are necessary. So those are some of the particular challenges that I think we got to experience as we went through TEPEZZA and its development.
Fantastic. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, so maybe I will. Joanna, you're going to say something? I can hold for a while.
Yes, I just wanted to join the discussion, and apologies for the delay and the technical difficulties. This is Joanna Opalinska. I represent GSK and our drug Blenrep. And it is one of those drugs that is unique in many forms and shapes, but GSK decided with it to really target a great unmet medical need in patients with multiple myeloma who, despite having a lot of options currently on the market, still have a disease that is incurable, that experience a decline in quality of life and really poor outcomes once the disease is relapsed and refractory to current treatments. When it comes to challenges during the development, we have generated a really very exciting preclinical package that was presented to FDA during our pre-IND meeting, and everybody, including FDA, were very excited about the data and full of hopes that this will translate into humans. When we went into our first time in human study, which we called then DREAM-1 study, we quickly saw that yes, the science is translating, and that we see a high degree of patients responding to the treatment, even though those patients were heavily pretreated. We were able to generate deep and durable responses. And with that data, we were able also to secure a breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA and a PRIME designation from the EMEA, which really helped us to accelerate our pivotal phase 2 study, which we called DREAM-2. The problems started mounting up when we got closer to the market authorization and with the COVID-19 pandemic, because it was exactly around the time that we were putting our BLA application together. So immediately we had to shift our face-to-face interactions with regulators to virtual discussions. We were participating in a real-time oncology review process, which was an uncharted territory, and we were the first medicine that was tried through this accelerated process. We needed to ensure the close collaboration between our team to quickly address the rapid questions that we were receiving from the agency. And plus, on top of it, everybody worked remotely and managed personal situations like closed schools and lack of childcare support. Finally, we had to navigate our first ever virtual oncology drug advisory committee. We were preparing for virtual presentation, but there was a twist and turn in the last minute where we had to switch to the live presentation. But in the end, the very hard work paid off, and the advisory committee voted unanimously in favor of approving Blenrep. And the approval followed about a month later. So the speed was really incredible for Blenrep. it was also a perfect example of GSK following the science, taking the smart risks, and working really with and the team working with an incredible agile mindset and dedication, and really stressing almost the old saying that if you want to go quickly, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And I think this is what our dream team really has represented throughout the years of development and hard work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joanna, for sharing that. And yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, so I was, going to the challenge we face. So, as I was pointing out initially, all the innovation that, capacizumab brought to the market, and, not surprisingly, in a ultra rare disease like TTP, being capacizumab, the first antibody fragments, being developed in the clinics in a phase 2 trial in a disease that is acute in nature and rare, where there is, not really a strong patient community. Recruitment was actually not easy. And, we saw, and going back to the part of the question before I didn't answer on the, how clinicians received this innovation. In the phase 2, we did have, from the beginning, a few of the top experts already on board, but, for the average physician not that familiar with TTP management, it was a bit more difficult. Then we saw a really interesting phenomenon, which goes back, to the value of publication and, disseminating science. We published our phase 2 results in the New England Journal of Medicine, while we were already doing our phase 3 trial, and we could clearly see an impact on the phase 3 recruitment, to the point where then, the trial was stopped. And with recognition of this being a potentially life-saving therapy, we actually had to open up, a really comprehensive global managed access program to ensure that new patients actually could continue to get access to therapy at a global scale, while we were discussing, regulatory approvals with the different agencies, and also, engaging in pricing reimbursement discussions in the market. So I think this is kind of, the normal evolution that you need to take in the science. And, these also going back, to the lessons learned. I'm a really keen advocate on believing on translational science. And if you are really, solid on what you believe is mechanism of action of your drug, if you really understand, the physiopathology of the disease, you start seeing the clinical benefits on the patients. You see that the safety profile is manageable, or at least expected, based on that mechanism of action. That's when you actually need to continue working with, the patients, the physicians, the scientific community in general, which, as a final step, ISTH has recently recognized capacizumab as a first-line therapy for patients that are actually diagnosed with this disease when ADAMTS13 testing is available, if there is a high pretest probability of the disease. So I think this is, in a nutshell, my answer to this last question and part of the prior one.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, just such great insights. And thank you so much, panel, for sharing. I mean, I just heard a couple of different things in those stories you were sharing. Javad, the cost and commitment that you have to have. And Liz, I'm going to shamelessly steal the fact-based leap of faith. But, I think we all understand the, complexities and truly the journey that it takes for breakthroughs. And then also just reflecting that we're in a pandemic where we're seeing acceleration in R&D. I would love to hear any thoughts or insights from your experience on how we continue to improve public understanding and awareness of the medical innovation process.
I mean, I'll say, speaking only from my own experience, I've never had so many friends and family be interested in what I do until we've gone through the last couple of years that we've gone through. I've had more discussions about what the different phases of clinical development mean, and how, what's an FDA advisory committee, and how does FDA make these kinds of decisions? It's actually been kind of an amazing public education campaign. At least that's been my experience of it. I cannot go so far as wishing that we have more of these in future so we can continue the education, but I think it does give a grounding to the general population that maybe hadn't paid as much attention to what we do and what our industry is all about.
Couldn't agree more. Panelists, any other thoughts?
Fully agree. I wanted to say a similar thing. There's all. I think health has become a center, has taken the center stage in the past 2 years in people's minds. So I think I think that personal aspect of what it means and what we do is much more tangible to people than it was before. Let's say for a bad cause, but for good reasons. So that's what it is. And I have to say, it's also even within our teams, even within the industry, I would say that awareness is clear. We're working in big machines. I mean, we are multi-hundreds, multi-thousand people working together, and sometimes we don't even know exactly what is happening. Some of us on this side of the company, same company, what is happening across the same company. So I would say that is important. And I have felt the same. I think Joanna shared that. Don't forget that these amazing achievements at the end of the day are attributed to people as well. So we talk about biology, we talk about drugs, but without good people, without good teams, and not individuals necessarily, I mean, none of these will be achievable. So kudos to those people who, despite the pandemic and while going through everything that everybody else was going through, still delivered on their passion and commitment. And I think that's something we should not forget.
I agree wholeheartedly. And let's talk about our way through, right, as we look forward into the future. If I could, I have one more question for the panel before we open up to the audience for questions. Where do you see the next wave of innovative trends kind of in your product area? And what excites you? What gets you up in the morning, if you will?
Yeah, I might start this one. So especially in the rare disease space that we are operating, one of the greatest achievements that we have been able to do together with the scientific communities, we have indeed, evaluated capacizumab, but, potentially as important as, the development of capacizumab is the knowledge we gathered on the disease in itself, because, never, such a number of patients were studied in such a comprehensive way. So, and we are taking this approach to try to go, further and beyond only capacizumab. What else can we do, which is already, quite good, but what else can we do, to make this life-threatening disease being diagnosed faster? What else can we do, to ensure that these patients, that although this is an acute disease, most of them actually, if they are not treated, promptly and properly in the acute setting, they might suffer long-term consequences of this disease. What can we do to monitor this patient better? How can we help through the data that we collected in our trials to understand better, what is available? I think that's kind of, should be also the focus for the future, is to look beyond, not only the drugs that we develop that normally have a huge impact in patients, otherwise will not be part of the nominees, but, also understanding the additional benefits that comes from, better understanding of the disease processes.
Yeah, sorry, Liz,
go ahead.
So, okay, I will go. So I would say that I'm very, call me biased, obviously, but I'm very interested in what ADCs can provide in oncology and beyond oncology in the next decade. I really believe that this decades-old idea of antibody-drug conjugates is finally actually providing benefit. And I would say that in the next 10 years, we will hear a lot about antibody-drug conjugates. In parentheses, in bracket, I would also say that I'm slightly disappointed that it's not in your poem, and my option doesn't show up on the poem. So, but more broadly, maybe if I can, just very quickly in the field of oncology, I really think we are moving towards an era of curing more and more cancer patients. I think with amazing results that we have seen, some of that I shared, is the idea of even daring to say that some metastatic cancer patients can be cured of their disease or have long enough remissions that they're effectively cured is now more and more in the reach. And that is such a transformative idea. If we can arrive closer and closer to that, that would be amazing. And I don't think it is a wishful thinking anymore. I think it is within reach.
Panelists, other thoughts? Liz?
Yeah, I think they didn't let us vote on the poll so that we couldn't put in our pet project. But in seriousness, I actually really agree with sort of both perspectives. You know, one, that I think that increasingly we're going to be able to better attune a given modality to what we're trying to accomplish with it. And I think ADCs is one example. There are a variety of them out there that I think really are sort of the future, you know, for my little therapeutic area and beyond. But I also do think that particularly in the rare disease space, you know, we learned so much about a disease and its impact on patients and its natural history through studying it through the course of what we see in our clinical trials. And so, you know, all of that resonated with me with what we've learned about thyroid eye disease, just as we've been studying it in our clinical programs. And I think that that's a really interesting component of what we all do in these rare disease programs, is continue to learn about the disease in a way that maybe nobody has before and doesn't if you don't have something that you could actually bring as an effective therapy for patients.
Great. Great. Thanks, Liz. Anything else from the panelists before we open up for audience questions?
I think Joanna's trying to talk, but she may be muted.
Yes, I have been unmuted now, hopefully. So I couldn't agree more. So the journey for our BlendRep isn't finished yet, and there is plenty of data coming in combinations. But I also am a strong believer in antibody-drug conjugates as the future of oncology and beyond oncology. I think the technology is really enabling us to go deeper and broader almost every day. There is so many new targets being discovered with our genetic screens. There are new conjugation techniques, new payloads. So it's almost like opening those vast oceans of opportunities. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to forget the immuno-oncology aspects that recently have really enabled us to make an incredible progress and give the patients cure or really prolonged survivals. And here with GSK, we have a number of assets targeting the CD226 axis with multiple targets. And we believe strongly that this is going to be the next generation of successful immuno-oncology therapies. Thank you.
Agree. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joanna, for sharing that as well. And to all the panelists. And we'd like to just take a moment to see if there's any questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, you can use your chat feature to go ahead and type in any questions you have there. And we'll give a minute just to see if there's anything that comes in. I believe there was a reminder there. Oh, sorry. Please enter those questions in the Q&A box, not the chat. Okay, and we have our first question. Thank you so much. I'll throw it out to the team and panelists, and please feel free to chime in, team. Can you talk about how merger and acquisition, so M&A activity, could accelerate drug development supply chain for your organization?
So I guess I can comment a little bit. You know, we relatively recently, 5-6 months ago, announced our acquisition of a company called Viela Bio, which was a transformative event for us in terms of bringing in a set of, you know, solidly mid-stage clinical pipeline candidates. I mean, I think broadly speaking, though, you know, what what I think you're hearing here is that innovation doesn't come from any one place. There are lots of good ideas out there. And I think that we all do our best from a pipeline building point of view as we make sure that we're getting the best ideas from internal and external. So that's how I've been thinking about it, at least.
Great, thanks, Liz. Panelists, any other thoughts? Javad?
Yeah, I would expand, maybe just quickly expand it. I would go beyond merger and acquisition. I call it partnership. So the means of doing something is for us to figure out, and it can change. This year can be an acquisition. Next year can be a partnership. The other year can be an independent development because you have all the means for that particular task that you have at hand. So I think I would advocate for an environment of partnership in its broad sense. So if we have the shared vision to help a specific group of patients, in my field, oncology, cancer patients, you just find the means of pursuing the science with utmost agility and with best quality. It doesn't matter where that means come from. Sometimes it means partnership, sometimes it means acquisition, sometimes honestly it means being acquired. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So again, as long as it serves the ultimate vision that is helping cancer patients.
Yeah, I can maybe share very briefly my experience here. I was actually, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, I was the medical head of Uplinks, a very small biotech based in Kent. We were acquired by Sanofi. The only thing I can say, we were able to reach far more patients that we potentially would have been, or at least faster than we would have been in the Uplinks days. And it doesn't mean that we were not prepared as a small biotech. We would potentially get there. I think it just basically maximized the efficiencies, and we could do, more and faster things that we would potentially not be able to do if we were still an independent organization. So I think that's kind of, if there is the willingness of more than one organization to actually help patients, I think there's actually benefits to that.
I think those are just fantastic points. And Javad, I just to double click on your point, the convergence of the ecosystem, how partners are coming together is just continuing to see, accelerate and see more and more. I think it is good for all and good for patients when we are really tapping into the full ecosystems, from accelerators, small bio, universities, providers, academic and research-based, community-based hospitals. And I think more and more we'll hopefully see that in kind of the evolution and acceleration of R&D. So I just think that's fantastic. Great question. We probably have time. We might have a minute for one more question. There's been such great dialogue. Are there any other questions from the audience? I think everyone's just excited to see the survey results. Is what's going on. Okay, if there's not any more questions, let's actually take a minute to look at what this group said from the survey results. Okay, fantastic. Well, a spread here, but it seems like a little bit of a lead, with about a fourth of us focused on the comprehensive diagnostics and therapeutics response. So very interesting response. Sorry, the question is a little cut off, so I'm just going to read the whole. It was the introduction of comprehensive diagnostics and therapeutic vaccines as preventative tool against a wide variety of cancers. Yeah, I think we shared a bit on that too, in combinations and such. So thank you so much for sharing that, for your insights. I just want to take a minute to say thank you to this esteemed panel. Just thank you for what you do every day for patients. And thank you for taking the time today to share your insights and thoughts on the journey that you've taken with the products that you shared about today. And before we conclude, I just want to say also thank you to Galien Awards and the group here today, and share one more plug that this session will be available on the Galien Foundation homepage. So if you'd like to see this webcast later, that's viewable there. There'll also be other things viewable on that site, including the evening awards ceremony that's happening again this Thursday, and the presentation of the humanitarian award winner. That was actually jointly awarded to CEOs of companies that have led the unprecedented arrival of vaccines and therapies to fight COVID-19. So with that, I will say thank you to everyone. Thank you again, panel, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Pleasure with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.